Right, so I cut my hair, so it's nice and short now. Yep, wife was really asking for it. So, what's going on this week? As I mentioned, we're up to chapter 15, skipping chapters 13 and 14. So quiz and discussion for that. And then exam 3 if you guys haven't done that. So that's where we're at. And we'll continue on. You guys continue to get weekly emails on Fridays. That gives you enough time during the week to get stuff in. So I'll send you guys those weekly emails on Friday on your current grade. So yeah, we should be finishing up most of the psychological disorders and treatment chapter during this stream. And then you have like a week break, and then psych research. I might just move the psych research up, at least the stream for that. And then you guys have like a week to work on your paper and study for the final. And then on the last final exam week, the final exam will be open. So I'll probably just do it that way. Usually I give you that week because it just takes us longer to get through disorders and treatment. But since this is like a one-way conversation for the most part, um, unless you're here live and chatting with me, most of the time it's a one-way conversation, and I don't show the videos, so we get through it a lot faster than we would if we were in person. So that's probably what the plan is. I'll cover psych research, and then you're left on your own for the rest of the time, like a week, to study and get caught up on all your previous work. And then you have the final, and then all the grades are in. Um, some campus news. Hopefully, you guys got that email about pass fail options. Um, if you really bombed this semester, if you probably bombed it, you're probably not reading this video. I'm seeing this video, so it's probably not going to be helpful. But there's conversations about getting a pass instead of a D, or an unsatisfactory if you fail or something like that. For if you're taking this class for fun, I think it works. But a lot of you guys are taking it as a requirement, and you need a grade for it. So the pass fail option wouldn't really be that helpful for a lot of things because most transcripts want you to have a grade for intro psych. So yeah, the better option would be to ask for an incomplete from me. That way you can be like, you know what, it's been a messed up heck of a last few weeks and all that. Can I do the work over summer? So an incomplete will allow you to turn in stuff over the summer. I'll work on how you guys get access over the summer as well as all the way to the fall. So it gives you all the way to the end of the fall semester to get the work done for this class. Um, I'm pretty lenient about offering those incompletes, so if you ask them, I'll give them to you. Um, yeah, so let me know. Send me an email if you want to get an incomplete. Other than that, yeah, other than that, that's pretty much it. I left a video last time telling you guys about watching the personality videos because I probably can't show them on stream and all that, violations, copyright errors and stuff. The videos are osmosis, so they're, I don't know, you could, if it doesn't load, the video should work. Let me just try it right now to make sure it works. Okay, it says video is unavailable. Okay, let's see. Personality disorder. You can type in personality disorders, osmosis, I guess, and there'll be a couple that shows up. So I like the osmosis ones, but if you can't find a link to them on YouTube, that's fine. Just watch another one on the different clusters of personality. So this is cluster A, audicentric personality disorders. All right, so I'll just go over them a little bit. Schizotypo, this is when you have strange beliefs. Some examples I come up with is, I think it's Luna Lovegood or something in Harry Potter. If you guys watch Harry Potter, the girl that has the really white blonde hair, and she's always talking about weird things. Until you find out at the end of the movie, their Nargos are real and all that stuff. So it's a little bit like that, just believing in magical thinking, being able to tell the future, kind of hippie-ish, not hippie-ish, those people that predict the future, the fortune tellers and all that. That's kind of schizotypical. Paranoid personality disorders, these people tend to have a lot of paranoia, um, a lot of conspiracy theories. So you can see kind of the paranoid personality disorders are the ones who are jumping on to the 5G bandwagon that causes coronavirus. Yeah, so just paranoid, just believing in all these wild theories, conspiracy theories. I think Trump has a group of supporters that I heard about. Like he has some conspiracy theorists in his group. So I forget what they're called. They're like some type of anonymous group that shows up in his meeting, his political campaigns and stuff, his rallies. That's what I was looking for. Schizoid individuals tend to be alone a lot. So these are just individuals who like to keep to themselves, and they're often seen as a loner. So it's kind of like, kind of these two types are related to schizophrenia. Schizoid being the negative affect of schizophrenia, so just not having a lot of expressed emotions. And they don't really have that much interest in hanging out with other people, so it's a little bit different from other personality disorders. Schizoids tend to just like to stay to themselves and be like a hermit. So there are some people who just prefer that. The second cluster, let's see if this video works. I think this one should work. Uh, yeah, I don't know. I gotta update my videos a bit. Actually, I'm able to see it on the thing, so that's weird. So maybe just the link's broken. All right, so yeah, so it should work if you search for osmosis cluster B personality. It does a really good job talking about the different types of personality disorders. Um, Briefly, antisocial. I have a lot of content on that. That's because that's one of the major ones. These people just don't really feel that much empathy for people. So they're able to manipulate and lie and do whatever they want because they don't really have a reaction to that. Borderline personality disorder. This is one I mentioned that's very similar to what people confuse with when they think of borderline bipolar disorder. Some people say they're bipolar when they really have borderline personality disorder. There's a couple of slides on that, so we'll revisit that. Histrionic personality disorder. These people tend to be the drama kings and queens. So they just like a lot of attention. They'll lie about stuff, and you're like, why do you need to lie about these things? It's just like to get that attention, to exaggerate and stuff. So you might have seen these characters in a lot of movies, right? The person who's like very not fun, a bit very outrageous, and then you find out, oh, they have this shattered personality or background. You know, like the girl who acts like she's rich but actually is poor. That's kind of like histrionic. Narcissistic personality. If you watch the video down here, it's just yes, just search osmosis cluster B personality disorders. It pretty much describes Trump to a T. So yeah, narcissistic personality says everything about him, how he's always doing only things that are important to him. And you can see this when he talks about like the coronavirus response, and he's like, "Look at my views or look at my ratings. They're like super high right now." And we're like, "They're super high because people are looking for somebody to lead them, not because you're a great president and all that." So yeah, he's definitely fitting in that narcissistic description very, very well. So yeah, borderline personality disorder. You can see there's a lot of text to it, but it's diagnosed more in women than men. The movie Girl Interrupted is a good example of borderline personality disorder. There's a lot of self-destructive behavior with borderline personality disorder. There's a lot of splitting where you really think things are super good or super bad. So this leads these individuals to have issues with just getting along with people because a lot of times they feel them as like you're my favorite person, and then you disagree with them on something, and then you become their biggest enemy. So uh, it's a challenge, and one of the reasons why they get into therapy for borderline personality disorder is because they don't want to be like that. They don't want to have these extreme reactions. They want to control their behaviors. There's a lot of regret after these outbursts. So the therapy is really just teaching them more about like cognitive control and just recognizing their patterns and reactions and trying to get ahead of their emotional reactive side. So there's usually some students with borderline personality disorders. Their relationships tend to be very tumultuous. The different origins. There's neurotransmitter imbalances, disturbed early relationships, parental abuse, other abuses. So borderline personality has um, these backgrounds to childhood sexual abuse, all that can cause someone to have quite a troubled personality. I didn't mention this, but these behaviors, these destructive behaviors, are supposed to call forth a saving response. So they're doing it for the attention. If you have a crazy ex-boyfriend or girlfriend, they might have some of these borderline personality disorders. If they ever threaten to hurt themselves or kill themselves if you break up with them, that's kind of like the saving response. Like, you can't leave me. If you do, I'll do these things to myself. That's the borderline personality. The harm is to the self, but the the motivation for it is to get you to save them in a sense. So they won't. A lot of the times they won't actually go through with a lot of the threats. But as long as you kind of respond to them, it makes it harder to leave. All right, antisocial personality disorders. Um, we have, yeah, these mainly more in men than in women, and we talk about like antisocial personality disorders as being very criminal, conduct disorders at a young age. So these individuals tend to be getting into trouble a lot. So I don't know if the video mentions it, but I mentioned it that when people use the term antisocial, they think they're using the term as in like, I'm not very social. Like, oh, I don't really like to socialize and all that stuff. I used to throw around that term antisocial all the time until I learned about antisocial personality disorder. So antisocial personality disorder, if you're calling yourself you're antisocial, you're basically calling yourself a sociopath or a psychopath, and that's not what people mean when they think they're saying antisocial, right? You're not saying, hey, actually, I'm a serial killer. Yeah, no. So now that you know, you should stop throwing around the term antisocial because it's not what you think it means, especially in terms of psychology. It's more of being a serial killer. So a lot of movies, American Psycho and all that, these individuals display antisocial personality disorder, Ted Bundy. These individuals don't care really about people. They just don't have empathy for other people. And so when I think of antisocial personality disorder, and the description says criminal behavior, but you can see that a lot of CEOs and stuff have antisocial personality disorder. It's just they don't get in trouble for it. The law is different when you have money, right? So if you're wealthy and you're, I don't know, causing uh, hundreds of thousands of deaths because you're, overprescribing and marketing these painkillers to people, you're not considered antisocial, right? Because you're making tons of money and you can get away with it. But the destruction you cause by yourself is a lot more than someone who has a criminal background. So, that's how it works. There's some antisocialness to being a CEO and getting the results that are basically self-serving. There are some gender differences. We usually think of men because they just get diagnosed more with antisocial personality disorder. Their behaviors are a lot more open, right? Hurting others, right? So more of strength, violence, aggressiveness, doing anything illegal kind of thing. Women tend to have more just different types, more frequent lying, running away, frequently missing school, forging signatures. Um, yeah, not so much. Blackmailing someone, so more manipulative and less overt just because of the physical differences. Some genetic some origins, we have some genetic predisposition. So criminals' behavior could be a neurotransmitter imbalance, biochemical imbalance. But some predictors that basically separates you having an early diagnosis of anti-personality disorder versus like being a functional CEO is background, right? So environmental background, right? Parental violence, parental criminal behaviors, poor family management, family conflict, all that may not show itself up um, when you're living in a wealthy background versus if you're in from like a poor background. All right, our last cluster, anxious inhibited, we have avoidant personality disorder. Again, video cluster C. Let's check if it works. Yeah, so that doesn't work either. Osmosis, cluster C. Yeah, that didn't load at all. So I guess the osmosis links are mainly broken. I gotta figure out to get you guys some new links for those videos. Right, avoidant personality, these people are avoidant, like building up a wall type, versus like not really desiring to hang out with people. So typo? Oh, is it? Yeah, let me look it up. I don't want to say the wrong thing. Yeah, schizoid, rather. These individuals don't want to hang out with other people. Avoidant individuals do want to hang out with other people, but they're avoiding it because they're afraid of the consequences, like making a mistake, being embarrassed, and all that. So it's the fear that's making them avoidant versus just not having any desire to. Dependent personality disorders, these people are submissive and dependent on other people. So these people just need someone to basically run their life for them. So you might know someone who's dependent if every little decision they make, they have to ask someone else for that decision, which can make them vulnerable to being in abusive relationships because they become dependent on the individual who is abusing. Obsessive compulsive disorder. So this is like not OCD, but just being obsessively compulsive about things and just wanting things to be in a certain way. It's not full blown OCD. It's just you want things to be a certain way. If not, it upsets you. But then it also makes you kind of lose a lot of time because you might want things to be a certain way too much of the time. It's kind of like when you watch Bridezilla or something like that, and they flip out because the napkins came in the wrong color or the wrong design. That could be like a OCPD. A lot of times you may not want to do anything because you want everything to be perfect, you want everything to be great, right? So a lot of students who have OCPD may not turn in their assignments because they're just obsessively worried about, is this assignment good enough? So they keep holding on to it, they keep holding on to it, they do it, but they keep holding on to it and they say it's not perfect, not perfect, and they don't turn anything in. Um, and then that can cause them to fail other classes rather than like the other motivations. So you're not really procrastinating. It's just that you keep doing things until you think it's perfect, and things aren't to you perfect ever. So then you just procrastinate until the last minute, and then you turn it in, and you get all these late penalties and stuff like that. Um, yeah, so that's a OCPD. Right, treatment for any of these personality disorders are really difficult because, as we mentioned, personality in the personality chapter is pretty much a trait, a big part of you. Um, it's a long developed habit, patterns of behavior, so it's really hard to correct all those patterns of behavior. So you got to keep going to therapy and really being cognizant and really all kinds of things, behavioral therapy, classic conditioning, all that to try to change who you really are. So a lot of times there are little changes, but not like huge movements in personality disorders. All right, our next one's really kind of fun. We have, I didn't check if this, okay, so the next one is dissociative disorders. So these are these really interesting things that happen where you dissociate from your awareness. So memory, awareness, identity, all that becomes disturbed in these dissociative disorders. So the first one is dissociative amnesia. So amnesia, remember, is not being able to remember information about yourself. So these individuals can dissociate hours or days or sometimes even longer years even. Um, Sometimes the problem with dissociative amnesia is you don't know you don't know what you've forgotten, right? So if something dramatic happens to you, your apartment caught on fire and stuff, you can dissociate. Afterwards people ask you like, hey, who are you? What were you doing here? And all that, and you just draw a blank, like you're just in shock, right? You can't remember who you are. You're like, I don't know what I was doing that day. That would be dissociative amnesia. So there are estimates about dissociative amnesia, but it's kind of hard because if you're walking home or going home or something like that, and then you witness a crime and you forget all about that on the way home, then you just kind of like, I don't know, I got on the subway yesterday, and then I came home. I must just like zoned out or something. So you don't know if you've dissociated. Dissociative fugue is a really interesting phenomenon when you basically decide to go for a walk, a drive, and then you completely forget about who you are and all that. So, if your dad went to get some milk and he never came back, that joke. Um, That's a dissociative fugue. But it has been recorded in some cases. If you watch, for example, Breaking Bad, Walter White claimed to have dissociative fugue. Basically, he was spoiler. Um, Something happens to him where he has to disappear for 3 days, right? So how would he explain this to his family members? Well, he faked dissociative fugue. Basically, he was like, oh, I'm gonna just show up in the supermarket, um, completely naked. That way, people will see that I'm really deranged, disorientated, something like that. And when they ask him, like, hey, where were you the last few days? He says, I don't remember. He's faking dissociative amnesia because he had a dissociative fugue. He basically wandered off a couple of days and came back later. Sometimes this happens when we're going on autopilot. If any of you guys ever go for like a run or a drive and you end up further than where you were, you might have dissociated some of that. So depends how much further, right? If you went for like a mile run and you ended up 8 miles away, you might have suffered from some dissociative fugue, right? Some thoughts were on your mind and then you just wandered and some time passed, you didn't recognize how much time passed, and all of a sudden you're like 8 miles away, or if you're driving, you're like in another state. And you're like, hi parents, I don't know what happened, but sorry for not picking up the phone for the last 6 hours, but I'm in, Carolina right now or something, or Florida. Actually, that's pretty far. New York City, it's like 4 hours, so somewhere in New York City or vice versa here. Um, some distance away, and then you gotta call your parents, like, I'll be back in 6 hours because it's somehow I drove 6 hours away. So, dissociative fugue. You have depersonalization, derealization disorder, so DID. This is the one we think of when we think of multiple. Wait, no, sorry, that's the next one. Depersonalization, derealization is when we get into like a fog, like a robot mode, where we don't realize what we're doing. So some people experience this after grief. So if some people have a grieving event and they're like, is it possible to not remember 6 months of my life because my grandpa died? That would be depersonalization and derealization. You remember like bits and pieces of it. You remember it being very foggy. You remember going through the motions, like you slept, you woke up, you ate, and you slept again, and all that. So just being there, but not really being there, that would be depersonalization. So I had a student tell me that she felt this when she was in a really bad car accident, and she was waiting on news of if the other person survived. So I guess she was at fault, and then so she's waiting on the news if the other person survived or not because they were in like the emergent ICU and all that. And for those few days when she was like wondering if she killed someone or not, she just don't remember it. She was just like, I was just waiting on the news, and I don't remember what I was doing for those few days until they called me back and said, hey, the person is going to survive. And that's when she snapped out of her fog um, kind of thing. So just, yeah, sometimes when you hear the new, like really bad news, you may also depersonalize or derealize where you just like zone out for a while. Yeah, out of body experiences. All right, so this is when I jumped the gun on dissociative identity disorder, DID. The movie Split, a recent movie Split. If you guys watched that, it's a really good example. It's a little bit exaggerated, like you can't create a personality like the Beast, um, but you can have people who have dissociative identity disorders. This one is still debatable because some people said it happens, and some other psychiatrists, psychologists, and stuff say they've never seen any cases of DID in their lives, so they might diagnose it as different. So there was like some medical journal about like I think one person having like 300 something personalities recorded, and at that point you're like, yeah, 300 personalities, something's going on there. Um, so sometimes it's by the psychologist, like even in the movie Split, the person who was diagnosing the protagonist as having DID, she also had multiple clients with it. So that's the thing. So it says 2/3 of cases of DID was diagnosed by 0.09% of clinicians. So that means if you had one case of DID, it's likely that you also saw DID in other people. But a lot of people just never have seen anybody with DID. They diagnose it differently. So sometimes you can create personalities because you just guess like, hey, who am I talking to right now? What's your name? And the person is almost like suggested to create that personality disorder. just went to close the door. Usually the reason why we create this alter ego, which basically a different personality, is usually due to early childhood abuse, physical, sexual, traumatic abuse, really traumatic things that cause us to basically split from having that personality. So the whole premise is that one personality remembers all the traumatic events, and another one just lives happily, oblivious to those traumatic events. So I don't know anybody that has a case of DID, so I can't tell you more than what the literature basically talks about it. But it's very mysterious, and there's tons of movies about DID. Um, yeah, so Me, Myself, and Irene, Identity, Session 9, Secret Window, Three Faces of Ease, Shutter Island, Fight Club, Psycho. Yeah, our media loves this concept of being able to split off from one's sense of self and awareness. But in reality, I haven't ran into anybody who has it. Right, origins of dissociative identity disorders, we can only think that it seems to keep disturbing memories out. So it's just basically a type of defense mechanism, repression, dissociation. Yeah. Seems to be limited to the Western culture though, so the ID doesn't seem to really exist in other cultures. I don't know. I think other cultures may have more mythical beliefs, so maybe it's not dissociative identity, but like possession instead. There's even talk about like how schizophrenia is more negative in our culture, where we have these negative thoughts saying bad things about us, where in some specific cultures it's more playful, so it's like some spirit joking with you or bothering you kind of thing. Right. Okay, so I talk about this. I normally skip over this. ADHD, we have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. A lot of students usually have it. And it's basically a neurochemical imbalance that causes you to have really uh, challenging times trying to pay attention for a long period of time. It's basically inhibition is off, and so everything just kind of runs wild in your brain. So it's hard to focus really on anything. Um, and for a long time, we didn't really diagnose this, and I think this still goes underdiagnosed for having ADHD in some populations, but in other populations, it's like overdiagnosed. So it's a challenge to diagnose ADHD at a young age. So does a child really have ADHD, or is it just because of environmental conditions, right? Some people say, hey, you can just have them do more exercise, play more sports, something, and then they'll be able to calm down. Um, if that works, great. Like, if it doesn't work, then maybe it is ADHD. Like, if this child just cannot calm down, maybe it is a neurochemical balance. So it really depends on that family situation. Is it really energy, kids being kids, or is there really something more to that? So it's more like how the parents handle it. So a lot of parents don't want to do the groundwork and parent really. And so they may be like, hey, take my kid and give him some pills so that they can calm down and all that. Whereas, some other parents prefer to not go on the pill method, Adderall and Ritalin. Um, and some parents prefer like using marijuana, so like a more herbal um, dosage. So usually it's not kids smoking weed, it's the CBD oil. So some parents claim that the CBD oil helps their kids calm down. I don't know if it's a placebo or if it actually works. I like to think that it does work, um, but that's how the cards play out. So I've had students talk about like not realizing they have ADHD all their lives. They just thought they weren't good at school or school was not interesting to them until they find out that their kids are diagnosed with ADHD, and they're like, hey, all these symptoms that this my kid has, I've had them growing up and I've dealt with it. So is it possible to go through life and never need medication for ADHD? People find ways. So like if you're now, I don't know, in your 40s and you realize you're ADHD, I think you've found ways to kind of help you to control your ADHD. You just feel like you're, I don't know, airheaded or easily distracted. Um, at this point at 40, do you think ADHD medication still helps you? I don't know if that answers that question. It's a considerable thought. I think most people when they're 40, they're like, it's fine. I've dealt with it. I wish I would have known sooner, but that's how it goes. And so you have Adderall and Ritalin. So what Adderall and Ritalin does is it just helps people to focus more. Um, it helps you to feel normal if you have ADHD. So if you've ever taken Adderall and Ritalin, maybe recreationally because people sell them, because it is used as a cheat drug, as we mentioned in the intelligence chapter, that some people abuse it as a cheat study drug. And as I mentioned before, if you take it and then you just feel normal, then you probably have Adderall. I mean, probably have ADHD. So, and if you take it and you get high on it, then you don't have it. It's kind of like the two distinguishing difference. Yeah, difficulty just following, paying attention, jumping around, being off the wall, and all that stuff. All symptoms of ADHD. Yeah, talking excessively. Origins, yeah, just brain chemistry really. There's a lot of genetic correlation between twins. Um, I had one student that had multiple kids with varying degrees of ADHD. So some were worse than others. Yeah, I mentioned treatment, cognitive behavioral therapy. Uh, yeah, the Adderall and Ritalin helps, but you grow tolerant to it. So you got to figure out how to deal with it. At least students end up figuring out how to deal with it because they have been on Adderall and Ritalin for a while. So usually it's diagnosed at some point in their life, maybe middle school, and they've been taking it since high school. And by the time they get to college, they realize that their tolerance, they're at the max dosage, and it's not working anymore. Um, so they kind of ration it, and that's one of the reasons why the drugs are on the market, because they're rationing when to take it, because if they take it too often, it doesn't work anymore. So they only take it when they need to study for finals or something like that. So that is a challenge with Adderall and Ritalin, that you grow tolerant to it, and it's not really a great drug. It kind of really does work your kidneys and stuff in getting rid of it. So they test your blood to make sure you're not taking too much of it and all that. So all right. I've had students who talk about marijuana as a solution to Adderall and Ritalin, so they might, get high and try to focus and do their work, and then take the Adderall and Ritalin when they really need to study for exams. I don't know. I'm not a medical doctor, so I don't know if I would recommend that. All right. Moving on to autism spectrum disorder. So, autism spectrum disorder is getting pretty high now. Don't believe in the whole vaccines cause autism, because they're like, hey, we have more vaccines now, and we have more autistic cases now. Yeah, remember, correlation does not equal causation. So the argument is not that, vaccines cause autism, but the diagnosis is a lot better now. We're a lot more aware of these disorders, and it's almost like a contradiction, how our society works with autism. So autism is a disorder involving social communication deficit, right? So that means you have difficulties in communication and interactions with others. That's kind of the definition for autism. Um, it's interesting because when we used to have a society that, I don't know, I guess the neighbors knew each other and all that stuff, autism may not have been recognized as much, because they're just like, hey, that kid's just quiet or shy or just not interested or a little weird, but they are perfectly okay. But as we get into a society that requires more and more social interactions, yet less interactions in person, that's a contradiction there, right? So we want people to interact with others more. The world is becoming more global, but at the same time, we're afraid to talk to our neighbors. So this causes a lot of anxiety issues, social anxiety issues, and autism spectrum issues, right? Anyways, the social communication and social interaction deficit is there. So these individuals have difficulties understanding social norms and back and forth and exchanges, and even reading what different emotions are can be a challenge. So there is a spectrum. So that means there is a wide range of this disorder. So you can have some people have very mild forms of it, and some people have very extreme forms of the disorder. So if you have a mild more form, it might not be noticeable, especially if you catch it early. So there's a lot of more research and diagnosis now. Your doctor probably is aware of it, so they usually ask like, how is the kid progressing socially? Are they talking to you or not? So some people who are late talkers may be more that might be a symptom that they may be autistic, but there's other things like, do they react to you when you point to things and all that? So they're catching it a lot earlier, and when they are able to catch it, they can start to implement cognitive behavioral therapy. So that's like teaching the child how to read responses or how to interact, and so that they follow the social norms. Because remember, abnormality is when you have a break from the social norms. So as long as you understand the social rules and you're aware to follow them, then your autism doesn't really show up as much. I think there's like a Netflix series called Abnormal or something like that that uh, has the main character as suffering from autism spectrum disorder. So you can watch that if you want some more details on how this disorder plays itself out. So some signs of autism spectrum disorder: restrictive, repetitive patterns of behavior, stereotype patterns of behavior, so certain motor movements, certain objects that they always have with them, um, needing to do certain things. Like it's almost like some signs of OCD, so they need things to be in a certain way. That may be signs of autism. Lining up toys, flipping objects. Echolalia is when they repeat things. So when you say stuff to them, they may repeat it a couple of times. That may be a sign of autism. Ritualized patterns, doing the same things multiple times or needing to do certain things in a certain pattern. So people with autism spectrum disorders may struggle with changing circumstances. So they need things to be the same way, or they start to have a lot of anxiety and issues. So yeah. Yeah. So ritualized patterns, right? So starting school would be hard. That's a break in your normal pattern as a child. So usually with autistic kids, you kind of have to like show them the school a couple of times before they actually start school, so that they get used to and comfort to the change in routine. So it takes a while to adjust to new routines. Um, I think my colleague told me about a story about this student basically flipping out because somebody was in their seat, and they moved another table in front of that seat and sat there and was really grumpy the whole time. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of extreme. But if you think about it from an autism spectrum perspective, then maybe the child, the student really needs to have that seat. Like that's their seat, that's their routine. And since someone was sitting in it that day, their solution was, I'm going to take another table, desk, and I'm going to move it in front of that person because I want to sit there because that's my routine. So you can see how if you have this awareness of different mental disorders, you can actually reevaluate certain situations. You know, this student is possibly on the spectrum, right? They may have fixated interests or highly restrictive, so just focus on certain hobbies, certain interests, like being interested in dinosaurs or space or robots, or whatever it is, horse races, sports, just very specifically that interest, and they have a lot of knowledge on it. There could be hyper or hypo reactivity to sensory input, so too much or too little. Um, so some individuals get really um, upset when there's too much stimuli. I had a student who the videos would always upset him. It's just like he was always, videos are too loud, and they're just like normal volume, but the sensitivity is to videos. It's kind of odd. But my lecture would be okay, but like whenever a video pops up, he feels like it's too loud. So that hypersensitivity. Symptoms usually present early, so I mentioned about your doctor diagnosing that very early now, and that's why the rate of diagnosis has gone up. But the earlier you catch it, the earlier you're able to engage in different therapeutic treatments so that it's less noticeable later on. There's probably a lot of students who are autistic that you probably can't tell unless they tell you. So now these are different severity of autism. So requiring support, requiring substantial support to requiring very substantial support. And you can see how this varies in what kind of disability they have in social communication and interaction. Yeah, I mentioned treatments, cognitive behavior therapy, and then our last group of disorders, schizophrenia. The video is pretty cool um, to watch. I think a lot of you just kind of have to watch a video on schizophrenia. A Beautiful Mind is a good movie that displays schizophrenia, um, and it's a real story based on someone who suffered, a professor that suffered from schizophrenia. There are professors who suffer from schizophrenia and continue to teach as long as they are medicated. The schizophrenic symptoms go down. So do watch this video on the 4 patients. I'm sure this video works because I've been showing it more than the other videos. Yeah, and that still works. I wouldn't watch the middle guy. I would watch the first one. I'll skip the guy with the blue beanie. He says a lot of nonsense, and I'll watch the lady at the end. I also skipped the last guy. I don't display him either. So I just want you to watch the first patient and the third patient. So some signs of schizophrenia, you have positive symptoms and then you have these negative symptoms. So schizophrenia comes in 2 forms, either positive as again, not good, but adding versus subtracting. So positive symptoms is what we usually think of when we think of people who are schizophrenic. They have agitated behavior, hallucinations, disorganized thinking, nonsensical speech. So these people are just like off the wall, talking to somebody that's not there. And hearing voices is a sign of positive symptoms. I had a friend, I might have mentioned it, but his thing was he would hallucinate sometimes and not know who's there or not, or see things that aren't there. So he's always like wary of what he sees. He's not quite sure. Um, so this could make him come off like really weird, right? If he's not sure, if you're a stranger and you come up and talk to him, he's like, I'm not sure that person's real, so I'm gonna ignore them until you like maybe you touch them. The delusions and the hallucinations feel very real, so to them, it's hard to distinguish between what's real or not. Um, I saw a lady one time at UCLA. We had a lot of homeless individuals suffering from schizophrenia, and this lady was talking on the phone, which I thought she was talking on the phone because she had like a ear earpiece on, right? It was like connected and wired, and she was like walking around talking to somebody, and then I noticed that it wasn't plugged into anything. So she was kind of like masking her condition with just having the earpiece, but it wasn't plugged into anything. She wasn't running around with a cell phone. She just had headphones on that made you think she was talking to someone, but she was just talking to herself. And I was like, oh, cool. Yeah, the conversations didn't really make any sense. So that's why I started like paying attention. Like, what is she talking about? And then it's kind of like all over the place in her conversation. And then that's when I noticed that she wasn't really talking to anybody. Um, so yeah, a lot of it makes it's really hard to focus when you have all these delusions. There's some more videos on how it feels to have these positive symptoms. The negative symptoms one is harder to notice. These individuals, like the first patient you see in that 4 schizophrenic patient video, he has more negative symptoms. So he's very flat. He tells a joke and you don't really get that he's telling a joke because his face never changes, his vocal expressions never changes. So that's a negative symptom. They just kind of sink into themselves. So you can have delusions. Paranoid delusions, for example, is on here. So some people have delusions, various delusions. Delusions of grandeur, meaning you're like a really important person. So you just walk around thinking like you're this great person. Everyone, knows you and should know you. Delusions of persecution means someone's chasing after you. So in the movie uh, A Beautiful Mind, he has delusions of persecution, like he's a spy and people are coming after him. I got to do this. Someone's chasing him. Those are delusions of persecution. Delusions of reference are people who think they know someone. Like, hey, I know Trump. I talk to Trump every day, kind of thing. That would be like a delusion of reference. Like you just know the queen or the king or the president, or some celebrity. Like you really know them, but you actually don't. Yeah, watch a day in the life of being a schizophrenic. So that's a pretty cool one. This one's on catatonia. So catatonia is when you just freeze really in place, a waxy flexibility. So with individuals who are catatonic, they just kind of sit there or stand there, and you can move them around, and they're just holding their position. It's like a lack of dopamine where they just kind of freeze in place, and there's very little movement. All right. You have delusional disorder, which is an offshoot of schizophrenia. Basically, you just don't have those schizophrenic symptoms, but you have very delusional beliefs. Just they don't really make sense. So everything else seems normal about you, but you just have this weird belief. Like, I don't know, um, someone who suffers from believing that they've been abducted by aliens might be that way. So like no other strange behaviors except they have this weird belief that they've been abducted by aliens or that they've been reincarnated and they were previously this other person or something. Just one little weird aspect about them, but not all these other symptoms. Schizophrenia has genetic links, so it does occur more in certain families than others, but it doesn't always present itself. And some people have different types, so that the odd eccentric personality clusters may be linked to having someone in your family who suffers from schizophrenia. All right, so all these different biological views of schizophrenia, complications, poor maternal nutrition, birth during winter, just different factors that they found to be associated with schizophrenia, but definitely poverty, poor parenting, and lower socioeconomic status has an increase in schizophrenic symptoms. So there is an environmental contribution to schizophrenia. At the same time, how a culture reacts to schizophrenia is an issue. So if the culture reacts like pretty normal to it and just like, hey, this person is normal, they're just suffering from a mental disorder, right? And they're safe. They're safe. They're not gonna hurt you and stuff like that. Then the person actually have better outcomes. Like the no more normal you treat the individual, the better outcome they actually have. I don't have a link to paranoid schizophrenia. There's one by The Onion. If you type in paranoid schizophrenics, I think paranoid schizophrenic parody. No, oh, is it gone now? Oh yeah. So the title is, oops, stop playing it. The title is the government spying on schizophrenics enough? And that's the YouTube link. It's by The Onion. It's a parody, so it's just kind of making fun um, of just beliefs that paranoid schizophrenics have. So if you have paranoid schizophrenia, that you believe like the government's spying on you and all that stuff, if you ever watched the movie Red, um, just government spying on you, the Onion makes fun of that. Like they're just saying like this, secret coded messages in cereal boxes and all that. So yeah, that's the cultural part of it is like if you don't react in horror and freak out when someone tells you like, hey, I believe the government's spying on me and there's cameras in the street lights and all that, and there's underground bunkers and reptile people and mole people living underground, and you're just like, okay, cool story, bro, and just kind of keep going on with it. They actually don't have that many symptoms because you're not looking at them like in an odd way and thinking that they're weird, because the more you isolate individuals suffering from schizophrenia, the more extreme the conditions are. So the more you just kind of accept them, then that's fine. So I tell this story because I've known people who had schizophrenics in their neighborhood. Usually these individuals are of lower socioeconomic status, um, and neighborhood's okay with it. They're like, oh yeah, that's that guy. He says weird things and he's kind of crazy, but he's cool. Like they talk to him, they like hang out with him, and just like, hey, how you doing and stuff. And neighborhood's okay with that. And this also went on the news, um, not too long ago, maybe a year or so ago, where the cops like shot somebody who was suffering from schizophrenia. I think because he was holding like a newspaper or something like that, and it wasn't a weapon, I think, or maybe it was, but he was harmless. He was like having an episode. So he was at a barber shop and he was having an episode, and everyone's like, and the cops showed up because I guess he was having an episode. Someone called, someone freaked out, um, and so the cops come and they don't know that this person. So they think they're like, hey, put down your weapon, and he's like having episodes, so he's not listening to them. He's like waving it around, and the neighborhood people are like, don't shoot him, don't shoot him. He has a mental condition. He's okay, he's safe, he's not gonna hurt anybody, and like, don't shoot him. But the cops ended up shooting the person. So that's kind of like the culture, right? If you're not aware of how schizophrenia works and all that, and you're not going to be patient and talk to someone who's suffering from a mental breakdown, a mental episode, that can lead to some really negative consequences, violence, and so forth. a bad reaction. So we've seen that in the news how American culture is not being that aware of the issues with mental health and not being um, reacting in a positive way, the correct way in dealing with issues of mental health. That's improving now. There are more training for first responders and stuff in reacting to situations where someone might be suffering from a mental health issue. So that's getting better, but it's still showing up on the news. All right, last slide. Just remind you guys the biopsychosocial view. Um, the idea that we have to consider all three different factors. So the biological factors to any mental health condition, genetics, vulnerabilities, biochemical, neurochemical imbalances. The psychological factors like their past experiences, their beliefs, their thoughts contributed to that, as well as the social factors like what environment they grew up in, what the environment treats them, how our society accepts mental health. So our society still has a great stigma towards mental health. So if we can improve on that, we could raise awareness with mental health, um, then it will help people get better if the society accepts it and understands it versus this weird thing that no one talks about. All right, so with that, um, we are done with the disorders and treatment chapter. Hopefully, you guys have a good time reading about it. It's a very interesting chapter. Um, we do teach abnormal psychology in the 200 section. So if you really like this chapter, Doug De Niro, I think, teaches it. So you can take that the next semester. Right, so everyone, I hope you guys stay healthy, and I'll see you guys next Monday.